Chapter 1. The Gathering Storm. The year is 2187, and Earth is on the brink of collapse. Climate change has ravaged the planet, with rising sea levels swallowing coastal cities and extreme weather events decimating agricultural regions. Geopolitical tensions have reached a boiling point as nations fight over dwindling resources and habitable land. In the midst of this chaos, Dr. Elena Petrovic, a brilliant astrophysicist, sits in a dimly lit conference room at the Global Space Agency headquarters in Geneva, Switzerland. She nervously taps her fingers on the table, waiting for the other attendees to arrive. As the room fills with scientists, politicians, and military leaders from around the world, Elena takes a deep breath, knowing that the fate of humanity rests on the outcome of this meeting. A holographic display flickers to life at the center of the table, revealing a grim-faced woman with piercing blue eyes and silver hair. "Good evening, everyone," she begins, her voice commanding attention. "I am Dr. Amelia Nakamura, Director of the Global Space Agency. Thank you for gathering on such short notice." Dr. Nakamura pauses, her expression somber. "I'm afraid I have grave news. Our latest projections indicate that Earth will become uninhabitable within the next 50 years. The situation is far worse than we previously thought." A murmur of disbelief and concern ripples through the room. Elena feels a knot tighten in her stomach, even though she has long suspected this outcome. "However," Dr. Nakamura continues, "we have a plan that will require the best and brightest minds from across the globe to work together like never before." She gestures to Elena. "Dr. Petrovic, please brief the room on Project Prometheus." Elena stands, her heart pounding as all eyes turn to her. She takes a moment to compose herself before speaking. "Project Prometheus is our last hope," she begins, her voice steady despite her nerves. "It involves the construction of a massive seed ship capable of carrying a diverse sample of human DNA, embryos, and a small crew of scientists and engineers to a new world." Elena brings up a series of schematics and simulations on the holographic display. The ship will be equipped with state-of-the-art propulsion systems, advanced life support, and artificial intelligence to guide its journey. The crew will be placed in cryogenic stasis for the duration of the voyage, which could last hundreds, if not thousands, of years. She pauses, letting the gravity of the proposal sink in. This is not just about survival. It's about ensuring that the essence of humanity, our knowledge, our culture, our hopes, and our dreams, endures long after Earth is gone. As Elena fields questions and concerns from the attendees, she can't shake the feeling that this gathering represents a pivotal moment in human history. The decisions made in this room will determine the fate of their species. The meeting stretches late into the night, with heated debates and impassioned pleas. In the end, a consensus is reached. Project Prometheus will move forward, with Dr. Elena Petrovic at the helm. As the attendees disperse, Elena lingers in the conference room, staring out at the starry sky through the floor-to-ceiling windows. She knows that the road ahead will be fraught with challenges and sacrifices, but she also knows that the alternative is unthinkable. With a heavy heart and a determined spirit, Elena prepares to embark on the most important mission of her life, to ensure that the legacy of humanity lives on, even among the stars. Chapter 2. The Weight of the World. The sun had barely risen over the snow-capped peaks of the Swiss Alps when Elena arrived at the sprawling campus of the Global Space Agency. She clutched a steaming cup of coffee, her third of the morning, as she navigated the labyrinthine corridors of the research facility. In the weeks following the fateful meeting in Geneva, Elena had assembled a team of the world's foremost experts in fields ranging from astrophysics and aerospace engineering to genetics and artificial intelligence. Together, they had begun the daunting task of bringing Project Prometheus to life. As she entered her office, Elena was greeted by the sight of her desk, buried beneath a mountain of papers, schematics, and data pads. She sighed, knowing that each document represented a piece of the puzzle that she and her team would need to solve. She had just settled into her chair when a gentle knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called out, rubbing her temples. The door slid open, revealing the familiar face of Dr. Marcus Adler, her longtime colleague and friend. "Elena," he said, his voice laced with concern. "You look exhausted. When was the last time you slept?" Elena waved off his question. "Sleep is a luxury we can't afford right now, Marcus. We have too much work to do." Marcus frowned, stepping into the office and allowing the door to close behind him. "You can't carry the weight of the world on your shoulders alone, Elena. We're all in this together." Elena leaned back in her chair, closing her eyes for a brief moment. "I know, Marcus. It's just, the stakes are so high. If we fail, humanity fails." Marcus placed a comforting hand on her shoulder. "We won't fail. We have the best minds in the world working on this project, and we have you leading the charge." Elena managed a weak smile. "Thank you, Marcus. I don't know what I'd do without your support." Their conversation was interrupted by the chime of Elena's communicator. She glanced down at the device, her brow furrowing. "It's Dr. Nakamura. She wants to see me immediately." Marcus nodded, understanding the gravity of the situation. "Go. I'll hold down the fort here." Elena stood, straightening her lab coat and taking a deep breath. She knew that every interaction with Dr. Nakamura was a test, a chance to prove that she was worthy of the immense responsibility that had been placed upon her shoulders. As she made her way through the winding corridors of the facility, Elena's mind raced with possibilities. What new challenge awaited her? What obstacle would she and her team need to overcome next? She steeled herself as she approached Dr. Nakamura's office, the weight of the world pressing down upon her. But beneath the burden, Elena could feel a flicker of hope, a glimmer of determination that refused to be extinguished. For the sake of humanity, for the sake of all that they had ever known and loved, Elena would not let Project Prometheus fail. She would carry the weight of the world, no matter how heavy it might become. With a final steadying breath, Elena raised her hand and knocked on the door, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Chapter 3: A Daunting Challenge. The door to Dr. Nakamura's office slid open with a soft hiss, revealing the director of the Global Space Agency seated behind her expansive desk. The room was bathed in the soft glow of holographic displays, each one presenting a different facet of Project Prometheus. "Dr. Petrovic," Dr. Nakamura greeted, her tone businesslike. "Thank you for coming on such short notice." Elena nodded, stepping into the office. "Of course, Dr. Nakamura. What can I do for you?" Dr. Nakamura gestured for Elena to take a seat before continuing. "I've just received word from our partners at the International Aerospace Consortium. They've run into a major setback with the development of the Prometheus's propulsion system." Elena felt her stomach drop. The propulsion system was the heart of the seed ship, the key to ensuring that it could traverse the vast distances between stars. "What kind of setback?" she asked, her voice tight. Dr. Nakamura sighed, leaning back in her chair. "The antimatter containment system is proving more unstable than they anticipated. There have been several small-scale containment breaches during testing, and they're concerned about the safety of the crew and the integrity of the ship." Elena's mind raced, already considering potential solutions. What about the backup system, the magnetic confinement chambers? "Also showing signs of instability," Dr. Nakamura replied, shaking her head. "The engineers are at a loss. They've requested our assistance in finding a solution." Elena stood, her mind already whirring with possibilities. "I'll assemble a team immediately. We'll review the schematics and see if we can come up with any alternative containment methods." Dr. Nakamura nodded, a glimmer of approval in her eyes. See that you do, Dr. Petrovic. We cannot afford any delays in the construction of the Prometheus. As Elena turned to leave, Dr. Nakamura called out once more. And Elena, I know the weight of this project is immense, but remember, you are not alone in this. The fate of humanity rests on the shoulders of all of us. Elena paused, looking back at the director. Thank you, Dr. Nakamura. I won't let you down. With that, Elena strode out of the office, her mind already racing with potential solutions to the propulsion problem. She knew that the challenges facing Project Prometheus were immense, but she also knew that failure was not an option. As she made her way back to her own office, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning. The road ahead would be long and fraught with obstacles, but she was determined to see it through. For the sake of humanity, for the sake of all that they held dear, Elena would find a way to make Project Prometheus a reality. No matter the cost, no matter the sacrifice, she would ensure that the legacy of their species lived on among the stars. The future of humanity rested on the success of the seed ship, and Elena would stop at nothing to see it launched. Chapter 4: A Glimmer of Hope. Elena sat hunched over her desk, surrounded by a sea of holographic blueprints and equations. The soft glow of the screens cast a pale light across her face, highlighting the dark circles beneath her eyes. She had lost track of how many hours she had been working, poring over every detail of the Prometheus's propulsion system, searching for a solution to the containment problem. Her team had been working around the clock, each member bringing their own expertise to the table. Despite their best efforts, however, a viable solution continued to elude them. Every potential fix seemed to introduce new problems, new instabilities that threatened to tear the ship apart. Elena leaned back in her chair, rubbing her eyes with the heels of her palms. She could feel the weight of exhaustion settling into her bones, the despair of repeated failures gnawing at her mind. Just as she was about to give in to the hopelessness that threatened to overwhelm her, a soft chime emanated from her communicator. With a sigh, Elena reached out and tapped the device, bringing up the holographic display. To her surprise, the face of Dr. Liam Sorensen, one of the youngest members of her team, greeted her with a wide grin. "Dr. Petrovic," he exclaimed, his voice barely containing his excitement. "I think I've found something." Elena sat up straight, her exhaustion momentarily forgotten. "What is it, Dr. Sorensen?" Liam's image was replaced by a complex series of equations and diagrams. "I've been working on a new approach to the containment problem," he explained, his words tumbling out in a rush. "Instead of trying to reinforce the antimatter chambers, what if we used a series of oscillating magnetic fields to create a sort of cage around the antimatter?" Elena studied the diagrams, her brow furrowed in concentration. As she worked through the equations, a spark of understanding ignited in her mind. "Of course," she breathed, a smile spreading across her face. "A dynamic containment system." Liam nodded eagerly. "Exactly. By constantly adjusting the magnetic fields, we can account for any fluctuations in the antimatter and prevent containment breaches." Elena felt a rush of energy coursing through her veins, the thrill of a potential breakthrough. "This is brilliant, Dr. Sorensen," she said, her voice filled with newfound hope. "I want you to run simulations immediately. Let's see if this approach holds up under scrutiny." "Already on it, Dr. Petrovic," Liam replied, his grin widening. "I have a good feeling about this." As the call ended, Elena leaned back in her chair, a sense of relief washing over her. For the first time in weeks, she allowed herself to feel a glimmer of hope. There was still much work to be done, countless challenges to overcome, but in that moment, Elena felt a renewed sense of determination. They would make this work. They would find a way to launch the Prometheus and ensure the survival of their species. With a newfound spring in her step, Elena stood and strode out of her office, ready to share the news with the rest of her team. The road ahead was still long and uncertain, But for now, they had a direction, a path forward, and that was enough to keep the flame of hope burning bright. Chapter 5. Whispers of Dissent. News of the potential breakthrough in the propulsion system spread quickly through the halls of the Global Space Agency. The atmosphere was electric, a palpable sense of excitement and renewed purpose permeating every conversation. Elena found herself at the center of a whirlwind of activity, overseeing simulations, refining equations, and coordinating with the engineering teams to bring the new containment system to life. As the weeks passed, however, Elena began to notice a subtle shift in the attitudes of some of her colleagues. Whispered conversations would cease abruptly when she entered a room, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she was being watched, judged. It wasn't until a late night in the lab that Elena finally confronted the source of the unease. She was hunched over a console, running yet another simulation of the containment system, when she heard the door slide open behind her. Turning, Elena found herself face to face with Dr. Mikhail Petrov, one of the senior members of the propulsion team. His expression was grave, his arms crossed tightly over his chest. "Dr. Petrov," Elena greeted, her voice cautious. "What can I do for you?" Mikhail stepped forward, his eyes narrowing. "I've been reviewing the latest simulations," he said, his voice low and accusatory. "The oscillating containment fields are a clever solution, but they're not foolproof. There's still a risk of catastrophic failure." Elena felt a flicker of irritation at his tone. "Every system has its risks, Dr. Petrov," she replied, keeping her voice steady. "But the simulations show that the risk is within acceptable parameters. We've run countless scenarios, and the system holds up." Mikhail shook his head. "Acceptable parameters?" he scoffed. "This is the fate of humanity we're talking about. There can be no room for error, no margin for failure." Elena straightened, meeting his gaze head-on. "And what would you suggest, Dr. Petrov? We've explored every option, every alternative. This is the best chance we have of making the Prometheus a reality." "Is it?" Mikhail challenged, his voice rising. "Or is it simply the best chance for you to make a name for yourself, to be the savior of humanity?" Elena recoiled as if she had been slapped. "How dare you?" she hissed, her eyes flashing with anger. "I have devoted my life to this project, to ensuring the survival of our species. I would never put my own ambitions above the well-being of the mission." Mikhail's expression softened slightly, but the accusation still lingered in his eyes. "I want to believe that, Dr. Petrovic," he said, his voice heavy with resignation. "But there are whispers, doubts. Some are beginning to question whether you are the right person to lead this project." Elena felt a chill run down her spine. She had always known that the weight of responsibility was immense, but to hear that her own colleagues were doubting her leadership was a blow she hadn't anticipated. "I will not be deterred by whispers and rumors," she said, her voice cold and determined. "The Prometheus will launch, and humanity will survive. I will make certain of that." Mikhail held her gaze for a long moment before nodding slowly. "For all our sakes, Dr. Petrovic, I hope you're right." With that, he turned and strode out of the lab, leaving Elena alone with her thoughts and the weight of the world on her shoulders. As she turned back to the console, Elena couldn't shake the feeling that the cracks were beginning to show, that the foundation of the project was not as solid as she had once believed. But she would not let doubt, from herself or others, stand in the way of their mission. The Prometheus would fly no matter the cost. Chapter 6. A Bitter Truth. Days turned into weeks as Elena and her team worked tirelessly to integrate the new containment system into the Prometheus's design. Progress was steady, but the whispers of dissent that Dr. Petrov had warned of continued to grow louder. Elena did her best to ignore the rumors, focusing instead on the task at hand. She spent long hours in the lab, poring over every detail of the ship's schematics, determined to root out any potential weaknesses. It was during one of these late-night sessions that the truth finally came to light. Elena was reviewing the latest batch of test results when a flashing alert on her screen caught her attention. Frowning, she tapped the alert, bringing up a detailed report from the Materials Science Division. As she read through the data, a knot of dread began to form in the pit of her stomach. The report outlined a critical flaw in the Prometheus hull design. The advanced alloys that had been selected for their strength and durability were showing signs of instability when exposed to the unique radiation profile of the ship's antimatter engines. Over time, the radiation could cause the alloys to degrade, weakening the ship's structure and putting the entire mission at risk. Elena felt a wave of nausea wash over her as the implications sank in. If this information was correct, it could mean the end of Project Prometheus, the end of humanity's last hope for survival. With trembling hands, Elena pulled up the original design specifications, desperate to find some evidence that the materials science team had made a mistake. But as she reviewed the documents, a sinking realization settled over her. The flaw had been there all along, hidden in plain sight. In their haste to push the project forward, to find a solution to the containment problem, they had overlooked a critical piece of the puzzle. Elena leaned back in her chair, her mind reeling. She knew that she had to bring this information to Dr. Nakamura and the rest of the leadership team, but the thought of admitting such a monumental oversight filled her with dread. As if on cue, the door to her lab slid open, revealing the stern face of Dr. Nakamura herself. The director of the Global Space Agency strode into the room, her eyes fixed on Elena. "Dr. Petrovic," she said, her voice tight with tension, "I have just received some disturbing news from the Materials Science Division. Is there something you wish to tell me?" Elena felt her heart sink. She had hoped to have more time to prepare, to find some way to soften the blow. But there was no hiding from the truth now. "Dr. Nakamura," she began, her voice trembling slightly, "I have just discovered a critical flaw in the Prometheus's hull design. The radiation from the antimatter engines could cause the alloys to degrade over time, compromising the ship's structural integrity." Dr. Nakamura's eyes widened, a flash of anger crossing her features. "And when were you planning on bringing this to my attention, Dr. Petrovic?" Elena swallowed hard, forcing herself to meet the director's gaze. "I only just discovered the issue myself, Dr. Nakamura. I was reviewing the latest test results when I came across the report from Materials Science." Dr. Nakamura shook her head, a bitter laugh escaping her lips. "So, not only have we wasted months on a flawed design, but our own project leader was unaware of the issue until now? Is this the level of oversight and attention to detail we can expect from you, Dr. Petrovic?" Elena felt her cheeks burn with shame and anger. "I have given everything to this project, Dr. Nakamura. I have poured my heart and soul into making the Prometheus a reality. I may have made a mistake, but I will not let it define me or this mission." The director's expression hardened. "We shall see, Dr. Petrovic. For now, we must inform the rest of the team and begin the process of assessing the damage. The fate of the project, and of humanity itself, hangs in the balance." As Dr. Nakamura turned and strode out of the lab, Elena felt the weight of her failure pressing down on her shoulders. She had let her team down, let the world down. But even in the face of this bitter truth, Elena knew that she could not give up. The Prometheus was more than just a ship, more than just a means of escape. It was a symbol of hope, a beacon of light in the darkness that threatened to engulf them all. And Elena would not let that light be extinguished, no matter the cost. With a newfound sense of determination, she turned back to her work, ready to face whatever challenges lay ahead. For the sake of humanity, for the sake of all that they held dear, failure was not an option.